Hey.
Alright, so there are truly people that are starting to take the Minnesota Timberwolves seriously again. Not me though, y'all be easy. Nah, I'm just kidding. The Timberwolves are actually a pretty interesting case study for the NBA this offseason because they also had a pretty interesting previous season. When looking at the roster, they have a pretty high payroll in relation to how well they've done over recent years. Despite having 2 former first overall picks in Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, 3 top 2 picks if you then include D'Angelo Russell in that group, 4 top 5 picks if you also include Ricky Rubio, and 5 top 6 picks when introducing Jarrett Culver to that group as well. Yet last season, all they had was a 23-49 record to show for it, which ended up being 5th worst in the NBA. But at the same time, there is some reasoning behind why people are getting excited for this team for the next season, and that's because if you do throw some decently heavy filters onto that record, there are some golden nuggets that do show some good signs for the future. For starters, you can compare the Timberwolves record from pre-All-Star break to post-All-Star break, where they started the season 7-29, but after the break, they finished with a 16-20 record, which isn't terrible. Now, the simple answer as to why that happened is because their top 2 players, Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell, both missed quite a few games with injury. They eventually got healthy, came back later in the season, and simply just, there's more talent on the roster that helped them win more games by the end of the year. Or you could point to the mid-season coaching change that the Timberwolves made last year. After a 7-24 start, head coach Ryan Saunders was fired and then replaced by Chris Finch, formerly with the Toronto Raptors coaching staff, and Finch ended the season with a 16-25 record, which again, isn't terrible. But the stat that I've been seeing a whole lot of people bring up this offseason so far is that when all 3 of Karl-Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, and Anthony Edwards were healthy and on the court playing together, then the Timberwolves had a record of 13-11 in those exact games, which, again, for the 3rd time, isn't that terrible, above 500 even. I'll even go on a limb and say that last season would have been the first step in the right direction for Minnesota had they not dealt with so many injuries. But at the same time, it's also fair to say that because of those injuries, it allowed a lot of the younger players, like especially Anthony Edwards, to get some much needed run and get acclimated to the NBA, which probably was a huge step in his development. And I say this because I actually found a really interesting fact while doing some research for this video. If you look at Anthony Edwards' last 40 games of the regular season, he averaged 23.5 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and 1.5 steals per game while having a true shooting percentage of 55%. And simply put, these are all-star worthy numbers, and I think already that's enough for me to say that the Timberwolves for sure got a good one in Anthony Edwards. No reason at all to question that number 1 pick. I think they're safe there. And so I think a lot of Minnesota fans are hoping that Anthony Edwards could be a sort of last infinity stone to this Minnesota Timberwolves roster to help get this franchise kickstarted and transition to a possible, contending team in a few years rather than continuously being a rebuilding one. Because again, just by looking at the roster that they have right now, there is so much talent on this team. Karl-Anthony Towns remains one of the most offensively gifted bigs that the NBA has ever seen in its entire history. And yes, I completely stand by that statement. In 5 of his 6 seasons in the NBA so far, Karl-Anthony Towns has averaged over 20 points per game while also averaging over 60% in true shooting percentage, which is just absurd, without even adding in the fact that over his entire career, he's averaging just a hair under 4 threes attempted per game, so it's not just him banging down low, he's able to keep a really high shooting efficiency while also shooting a good amount of threes. And while you can make the claim that defense is most certainly still an issue for Towns, I'll just point your attention over to Nikola Jokic, who most recently won the NBA MVP award. He's another big man who a majority of his game is focused on the offensive side of the ball while also having a whole lot of defensive struggles, and I really don't think it's unrealistic to say that Karl-Anthony Towns could have a similar, if not the same, impact that Jokic does offensively when comparing the two. The main difference between Jokic and Towns is that one of them has had a really good team and system built around them where they're able to play their strengths and win games and just overall be a winning franchise, while the other has had little to no help to this point in his career, is stuck in a franchise that's been historically bad for quite some time now, and has overall just been labeled as an empty stats machine. So if there is one thing that I am rooting for on this Minnesota team, it's definitely that Karl-Anthony Towns starts earning some more respect from the viewers of the NBA. As for the rest of the roster, I'm still not quite sure how I feel about D'Angelo Russell. Because at this point in his career, I think we all know who D'Lo is. He's a combo guard, capable of scoring 20 a night while also being able to create shots for others as well. And while I do think he's a very underappreciated playmaker, I also don't believe he's quite fit to run an NBA offense. I was actually pretty intrigued when he came back from injury and the Timberwolves decided to keep him on the bench as a sort of, super six man, because in that role he's able to help those bench lineups score and just generate better shots. Meanwhile, the starters are able to keep Ricky Rubio with them, who's able to facilitate for guys like Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns, Malik Beasley, all guys who need a good facilitator like Rubio. And speaking of Malik Beasley, off-court issues aside, he just signed an extension, is another 20-point per game scorer who is also a legit threat from the three-point line, and overall just another really, really good offensive weapon for this team to use. And again, as long as this team is just able to stay healthy, I'm really not worried at all about the offensive side of the ball, because they have Karl-Anthony Towns and then 3 guards in D'Lo, Anthony Edwards, and Malik Beasley, who all just averaged 19 points per game this previous season. Because obviously there's a caveat that these guys barely ever actually played together, but it's still insane that if you add up all of their averages for points per game over this past season, it would add up to 85 points a night, which with 4 guys is absurd. But with that being said, it's definitely the defensive side of the ball that still very much worries me about the Timberwolves and their future, especially for this next season. Because as of now, they're relying on a whole lot of their younger players who they most recently drafted, guys like Josh Okogie, Jaden McDaniels, and Jalen Noel, to be their defensive-minded players, but the problem is that they're all still very much unproven offensively. And that's not to say that they can't improve as players. They're all young, they have plenty of time to develop and grow in the NBA, but just as in the current state that they're in, their negative offense just basically cancels out their positive defense, and it just doesn't exactly help the roster out a whole bunch. And also, while we are on the topic of younger players, I do want to give a quick shout out to Naz Reid, because this is a Naz Reid fan club account here. We love Naz Reid. He very quietly averaged double-digit points as a 21-year-old backup center while also shooting 35% from 3 on 2.5 attempts per game. All great stuff. He should definitely be a fun name to watch going forward. Anyway, if the Timberwolves are going to be making moves this offseason, I definitely think it should be to prioritize their defense because, as I've stated, offense seems like it's pretty much under control. They need to get the defensive side in check though. And because they don't have a whole lot of cap space to go out and make any big additions through free agency, I would expect to continue to see them in trade rumors and trade talks, because we all know trade rumors are a dime a dozen at this point in the offseason timeline, so we just have to continue to sift through all of those good things. And when it comes to those trade talks, I think the most notable name that would make the biggest impact while being brought over to Minnesota would be Ben Simmons. I like the Timberwolves as a landing spot for Simmons for many reasons. First off, it's a smaller market, so the national media will not be paying attention to him as much as they did when he was in Philly. There's already a whole lot of offense and just good spacing to surround him with again, Karl-Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley. Defense is probably the #1 issue for the Timberwolves right now, and Ben Simmons is one of the top defenders in the league, can defend 1 through 5, and just overall would plug so many holes for this team. Plus, there's a whole lot of avenues that Minnesota could go down to just get this deal done, because they have a whole lot of role players they could send with picks, or they could send someone like D'Angelo Russell if the Sixers truly do want that all-star level type player. But Simmons aside, whether they get a deal done or not, my official stance now, after doing some research, is definitely changed on the Minnesota Timberwolves from when prior to making this video. Because as of now, heading into the 2022 season, I'm officially buying stock into the Minnesota Timberwolves, which is something I very much doubted I'd be saying this offseason. Now, with that being said, I very much doubt that they're actually going to make a whole lot of noise in an already pretty stacked Western Conference, but I wouldn't be surprised if they could maybe sneak their way into the play-in game, or, something around that range. Because obviously we'll have to wait and see what they're going to do on draft night and just through free agency in general, or if they're going to make any trades at any point. But at the very least, this Timberwolves team should remain a fun and young team to watch. If you guys know what the term a league pass team is, those are the fun young teams who don't necessarily win a lot, but I think Minnesota fits that mold pretty close to perfectly as, again, we head into the 2022 season. So keep them on your tabs. Should be fun to watch. I'll be enjoying them at some point, hopefully. And if you've made it to this point in the video, then congratulations, you're a real one. Now, if you enjoyed this video, maybe think about hitting the subscribe button. Should be somewhere in this general direction. Or if you're not sure yet, maybe check out another video which should be in this general direction. Either way, thank you for watching.